Clara had always been known for her calm nature and the organized routine she kept as a literature teacher. She lived alone in a small apartment, surrounded by books and souvenirs from the solitary trips she took that made her feel free. Her life, though simple, gave her a sense of security and control. This balance, however, was beginning to be threatened by a stirring within the family. Marina, her older sister, had a completely different life. Married with two young children, her days were a whirlwind of school runs, bills, and domestic worries. Clara had always admired her energy, but she also felt that Marina expected too much from her. The two sisters loved each other, but there was a constant tension between them, as if each was a mirror of the choices the other had not made. In recent months, the name of Marina's father-in-law, Roberto, had started coming up frequently at family lunches. He was sick, and his condition seemed to be getting worse quickly. Clara didn't know him very well, but she could see a shadow of fear in her sister's eyes. This illness wasn't just affecting an elderly man, it was threatening the very foundation of Marina's family. On a rainy afternoon, Clara got a call from her mother. Her voice was trembling as she explained that the doctors had suggested a kidney transplant for Roberto. The news settled like an invisible weight on Clara, even if it still felt distant. She just murmured words of comfort, unaware of what was coming next. During that same Sunday dinner, Marina barely touched her food. Her eyes were red, as if she had cried all night. Clara could tell something serious was about to be said, but she tried to keep a calm demeanor. Deep down, she felt that this storm was inevitably heading her way. The tension at the table grew. Marina's children played, oblivious, while the adults avoided direct eye contact. Clara was pushing food around on her plate when she heard her sister clear her throat. It was the kind of silence that comes right before a painful revelation. Marina looked up and took a deep breath. She said that Roberto urgently needed a transplant and that the family was already being counseled by the doctors. Her voice broke at the end of the sentence, and the tears came without warning. The air in the room grew thick, almost suffocating. Clara felt her stomach drop. Until that moment, the illness had seemed like a distant concern, something that only affected her sister and brother-in-law. But suddenly, there was something in the way everyone was looking at her that made her heart race. It was as if a silent expectation was about to be laid bare. Without a single word being spoken, Clara understood that her world was about to change. There was a hidden plea in Marina's eyes, and she felt the weight of that request even before hearing it. The balance of her life was about to be shaken in a way she had never imagined.
That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The rain beat heavily against the window, and each drop seemed to echo the question beginning to take root inside her. How far was she expected to go for a family that, deep down, wasn't really hers? What about you? Would you have the courage to say no like Clara, or would you give in to family pressure? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss any of the upcoming intense stories that will touch your heart. Because here, every story is a mirror of real life. 2 days later, Marina showed up at the school where Clara worked. She looked worn out, with deep dark circles under her eyes, and seemed to have aged weeks in just a few days. Clara met her in the teacher's lounge, surprised by the unexpected visit. She already knew something important was coming, but she tried to maintain a welcoming smile. Marina didn't waste any time. Between sobs and rushed words, she explained that the initial tests within the immediate family had shown low compatibility with her father-in-law. The doctors had suggested expanding the search to more distant relatives, and the possibility of Clara being tested had come up. The silence that followed was cutting. Clara's eyes widened, unable to respond immediately. A whirlwind of emotions overwhelmed her: fear, disbelief, and even a prick of indignation. She knew Roberto, but they had never been close. Now, suddenly, her health and perhaps her life was being put on the line for someone who was barely part of her everyday world. Marina gripped her sister's hands tightly, as if trying to convey her anguish through touch. She said she understood it was a huge thing to ask, but that she was desperate. Tears streamed down her face, and her voice trembled as she repeated that without Clara, there might be no other chance for her father-in-law. Clara tried to argue that she needed time to think. She said she couldn't just decide right there, in the middle of the school, faced with such a monumental request. Marina wouldn't accept any delays. With every word, her plea became more of an appeal, almost a demand. In that moment, the relationship between the two sisters seemed to transform. There was no more complicity or affection, just a chasm of expectations. Clara felt cornered, as if her choices were no longer her own. The weight of responsibility was becoming unbearable. The look in Marina's eyes, marked by desperation, hurt more than any direct accusation. Clara realized that behind this request was not just Roberto's life, but also her sister's fear of losing her own family. The request was impossible because it went beyond saving one man. It was an attempt to save an entire world.
Clara agreed to get the tests done, but her voice came out weak, almost a whisper. It wasn't a yes of decision, but a yes from someone who hadn't found the strength to say no. As she left the school, she felt as if she had lost a part of herself. On the way home, Clara watched the people on the street with a strange feeling of isolation. Everyone seemed free, busy with their ordinary routines, while she carried an invisible burden. The fear of hospitals, of surgery, and of losing her own health was already beginning to torment her. That night, Clara stared into the mirror and barely recognized herself. Her eyes reflected the dilemma that had just been born: to be seen as selfish for saying no, or to sacrifice herself for someone who had never truly been a part of her life. The following days were a whirlwind of anxiety for Clara. She went through with the tests without saying much, clinging to the hope that the compatibility wouldn't be confirmed. But deep down, she knew luck was rarely on her side. The hospital, with its cold, echoing hallways, only increased her discomfort. When she got the call from the doctor, Clara's heart nearly stopped. He confirmed that she was the only one compatible with Roberto. The words were spoken carefully, but the emotional weight crashed down on Clara like an avalanche. On the other end of the line, Marina was waiting anxiously for the answer. Clara could barely breathe. Her silence was interpreted by her sister as unnecessary hesitation. Marina cried, thanked God, and repeated over and over that everything would be okay now. Clara, however, did not share that relief. For her, the news felt like a sentence. That evening, the family gathered at her parents' house. Marina shared the news with excitement, as if it were the salvation everyone had been waiting for. Clara stayed quiet, feeling each relative's gaze like a silent demand. The once familiar environment now felt like a courtroom. Her parents reacted in different ways. Her mother, emotional, said that Clara had been chosen for a greater purpose. Her father, in contrast, looked at her daughter with genuine concern, as if he sensed the weight this represented for her. The contrast between them only added to Clara's confusion. While the others celebrated Roberto's chance at life, Clara isolated herself on the balcony. The cool night air wasn't enough to relieve the pressure in her chest. She felt like a piece in a puzzle she never wanted to be part of. She remembered the few times she had spoken with Roberto, superficial moments, quick greetings at family parties, nothing that justified a deep connection. The idea of giving a part of herself to a virtual stranger seemed absurd, but no one else saw it that way.
Marina came over and hugged her tightly, thanking her over and over. Clara couldn't reciprocate. She felt used, as if her identity had been reduced to the function of a savior. The contrast between her sister's desperation and her own fear was tearing her apart inside. That night, back at home, Clara cried alone. She didn't know if she was crying for her sister's father-in-law, for the family pressure, or for the loss of her own peace. The future seemed like a maze with no way out. And for the first time, Clara asked herself, how far did her duty as a sister really go? The days grew heavier. Clara woke up every morning with a feeling of tightness in her chest, as if she couldn't catch her breath. The simple sound of the phone ringing was enough to make her heart race, fearing it was another demand from Marina. At work, her students began to notice her distraction. The teacher, once so dedicated and attentive, now seemed lost in thought. The books that once comforted her could no longer keep the shadow of her anguish at bay. The fear of hospitals and surgery haunted her like a ghost. Clara knew donating a kidney wasn't a simple decision. She discreetly researched the risks, complications, and stories of people who had suffered long-term effects. The more she read, the more terrified she became. The idea of losing her independence, her health, and even her life paralyzed her. Meanwhile, Marina kept up the pressure. She sent constant messages, including photos of the children with captions like, "Do this for our family." Every word felt like a blow, a mix of love, guilt, and manipulation. Clara felt cornered with no room to breathe. One Friday night, Clara decided to skip a dinner at her parents' house. She wanted a break from the constant tension, but her absence was interpreted as coldness. Her mother called, disappointed, saying that Roberto didn't have much time left and that Clara needed to think about what was at stake. Clara cried after hanging up. The feeling of being the villain in this story was starting to corrode her soul. She loved her family, but she couldn't ignore the inner voice screaming for self-preservation. She was torn between two worlds that seemed impossible to reconcile. In the middle of this turmoil, Clara began to question the true meaning of family love. Was love it to give up her own body unwillingly? Or was it love to be honest with herself, even if it meant being rejected by her own family? Every time she closed her eyes, she pictured herself lying on a cold hospital gurney, surrounded by machines and scalpels. The fear was so intense it gave her chills. But at the same time, the image of her sister crying, begging for her help, was seared in her mind. The weight of the decision was crushing. Clara knew she couldn't run away forever. Time was running out, and an ending seemed inevitable.
And deep down, she feared that either choice would destroy her. The following Sunday, Clara was persuaded to attend the family lunch. She had barely walked through the door when she felt the weight of their expectations hanging in the air. All eyes turned to her, as if she alone carried everyone's hope. The mood, though quiet, was suffocating. During the meal, Marina spoke up. Through tears and pleading, she talked about how important Roberto was to her family and how she couldn't bear to see him go. Every sentence seemed carefully crafted to target Clara's heart. Clara listened in silence, but inside, the knot in her throat only tightened. Her mother, emotional, reinforced Marina's words. She said Clara had been blessed to be compatible and that this gift couldn't be wasted. She spoke as if it were a matter of destiny, not choice. Her father, however, kept his gaze down, showing his concern in silence. Clara tried to defend herself, explaining that she still needed time to think, but her words were met with impatience. Marina insisted there was no time, that every lost day put Roberto's life at greater risk. The atmosphere became unbearable, and Clara felt cornered. Marina's children, unaware of the drama, were playing in the backyard, but even they were used as an argument. Marina, her voice choked up, said her children needed their grandfather and that Clara couldn't be indifferent to that. The implicit accusation cut deep. Her mother then recalled stories from the sisters' childhood, reminding them of times they had always helped each other. To her, Donating a kidney was just another form of sisterly care. Clara, however, saw it completely differently. This was an irreversible sacrifice, not a simple gesture. With every word, the weight of guilt grew heavier. Clara could no longer distinguish between her own choice and what was being forced upon her. It was as if her identity was being smothered by the chorus of voices demanding her surrender. By the end of the afternoon, Clara said her goodbyes in silence, hiding her tears. The feeling of being a burden to her own family was crushing. As she drove back home, the steering wheel trembled in her hands. She knew the pressure wouldn't let up. On the contrary, each day without an answer would increase the weight on her shoulders. And deep down, she feared there was no way out that wouldn't destroy her. The next week, Marina showed up at Clara's apartment unannounced. She got straight to the point, carrying with her not just worry for her father-in-law, but also years of pent-up resentment. The tone of the conversation quickly turned harsh, and the careful silence between them was broken.
Marina accused Clara of always running away from responsibilities. She said that ever since they were little, Clara would hide behind a facade of fragility to avoid taking on difficult roles. To Marina, this was nothing new. It was just more proof that Clara had never truly measured up to the family's expectations. Clara tried to defend herself, reminding Marina that she had always been there for the important moments, even if she wasn't the one in the spotlight. But her words were drowned out by her sister's resentment. The argument stopped being just about Roberto's kidney and began to lay bare a past filled with rivalry and comparisons. Childhood memories came flooding back. Marina recalled all the time she had to take care of Clara, who would retreat into her books and studies. Clara, in turn, remembered the constant demands and the feeling of never being good enough in the eyes of her older sister. The small room in the apartment seemed to shrink in the face of this storm of words. Clara cried, saying she couldn't be held solely responsible for saving Marina's family. The decision wasn't simple, and her fear didn't make her selfish. But Marina fired back, saying that by refusing, Clara would be condemning a man to death and destroying everyone's stability. The silence that followed was heavy. Marina stormed out, slamming the door and leaving Clara in pieces. The echo of their argument reverberated off the walls, like an open wound that would never fully heal. That night, Clara felt a huge emptiness. More than the issue of the kidney, it hurt to know that her sister saw her as an enemy. Their relationship, already fragile, seemed to be crumbling for good. Her father called later, worried. He asked how she was, and Clara tried to play it off, but her shaky voice betrayed the tears she was holding back. He didn't say much, only reminded her that her own life had value too. Through her tears, Clara realized this decision wasn't just medical or moral. It was a mirror of the old wounds that had always separated the two sisters, and now more than ever, those wounds were bleeding uncontrollably. The news of Clara's compatibility spread through the family like wildfire. Aunts, cousins, and even neighbors began talking about the miracle of her being able to save a life. But behind the initial praise, looks of expectation and murmurs of judgment began to emerge. At family gatherings, Clara could feel the air grow thick. There was always someone who would approach her with loaded questions. So, have you scheduled the surgery yet? Or, God chose you for this mission. You can't refuse. Every phrase felt like a sentence disguised as a blessing. At work, her concentration fell apart. Her colleagues noticed her paleness, but Clara avoided confiding the real reason for her anguish. The external judgment was already unbearable. Exposing her hesitation to more people would only add to the weight on her shoulders. Marina, meanwhile, began using social media as a tool for pressure. She posted messages about faith, hope, and gratitude to an angel sent by God, heavily implying that this angel was Clara. With every post, the teacher felt more trapped in a narrative she never chose.
The private messages kept coming. Distant relatives sent prayers, reinforcing the idea that she had an inescapable moral obligation. Clara, however, read every word as a veiled accusation. Her heart filled with guilt, but also with anger. On a rainy afternoon, Clara went to the neighborhood bakery. While waiting in line, she overheard two neighbors talking about how awful it would be if she refused to donate. The feeling of being watched and judged in the most ordinary places was the last straw. Back at home, Clara collapsed on the sofa. The world seemed to be conspiring to force a decision from her that her heart wasn't ready to make. She felt more and more alone, as if everyone was against her. Her father was the only one who offered a silent shoulder to lean on. He listened without judgment. He repeated that donating was an act of love, but that love couldn't be forced. Those words were the only thread keeping her upright. Even so, Clara started avoiding family gatherings. The judgment had become unbearable, and she preferred solitude to the accusing stares of those expecting heroism. But deep down, she knew hiding wouldn't solve anything. With each new day, Clara had the feeling she was being pushed toward an abyss, and she feared that if she fell, she wouldn't have the strength to get back up. It was during a routine medical appointment that Clara discovered something that would change everything. While talking with the doctor, she almost accidentally heard that there was another potential donor, a distant cousin of Marina's husband, with a lower but still viable compatibility. The doctor, noticing her surprise, tried to explain. He said that although Clara was the best option, she wasn't the only one. The revelation hit her like an explosion. Why had Marina never mentioned this? Back home, Clara spent hours staring at the ceiling, feeling a mix of relief and outrage. On one hand, she wasn't the only one who could save Roberto. On the other, her sister's omission felt like a betrayal. The trust between them was already fragile, and now it seemed completely broken. Clara remembered the tears, the desperate pleas, the harsh words Marina had said. All of it had been shaped by a half-truth. The pain of being manipulated burned more than any accusation of selfishness. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She imagined her sister choosing which information to reveal, calculating the pressure needed to get what she wanted. Resentment grew in her chest like an open wound. The next day, Clara decided to confront Marina. She called and asked to meet at a cafe. The tone of her voice left no room for refusal. Marina agreed, but she arrived at the meeting already defensive, as if she knew she would be questioned.
Clara didn't waste any time. She asked directly about the other donor. Her sister's silence was more revealing than any answer. Marina tried to justify herself, saying the chance was small and that she didn't want to create false hope. But her words sounded like excuses. The cafe, once full of laughter and conversation, now felt like a silent battlefield. The two sisters looked each other in the eye, each carrying both old and new pain. Between them, trust was shattering like broken glass. Clara left the meeting with her heart on fire. The kidney dilemma was heavy enough, but now it was overshadowed by manipulation. The battle between them was no longer just about saving a life. It was also about truth, trust, and respect between sisters. The next meeting between Clara and Marina didn't take long to happen. This time, there were no disguises or attempts to soften their words. Clara arrived determined to express her hurt, and Marina, already on edge, was ready to defend herself. The mood was one of declared war. Clara didn't waste time. She accused her sister of manipulating her by hiding information that could have lightened the load on her shoulders. Her voice trembled with anger and pain, as if each word were a thorn being pulled from her chest. Marina, in turn, reacted with indignation, saying she had only done what was necessary to save her father-in-law's life. The argument quickly intensified.
Marina threw in Clara's face every time she had shirked family responsibilities, accusing her of always choosing the easiest path. To Marina, this hesitation was just another chapter in her cowardice. Clara, hurt, fired back that she had always lived in her sister's shadow, constantly judged for not meeting the family's expectations. To her, the pressure wasn't just about the kidney, but about a whole lifetime of being treated as less important. Their voices rose, drawing attention from people nearby, but neither of them seemed to care. It was as if years of resentment had finally found a channel to explode. Roberto's kidney was just the spark that ignited a barrel of accumulated grievances. Marina cried, saying she couldn't lose her father-in-law and watch her husband's family fall apart. Clara cried too, saying she couldn't be forced to sacrifice her life for someone she had never had a bond with. Their tears didn't ease the pain, they only made it more visible. At the height of the argument, Clara declared that she would not give in just because everyone expected her to. Her words landed like a bomb, and Marina looked at her as if she were facing a traitor. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Marina left without looking back, leaving Clara alone amidst the painful memories. It felt as if the bond between them had been broken forever. Clara, on her way home, felt exhausted, as if she had fought a war she never chose. But for the first time, there was also a spark of liberation, the courage to say no, even in the face of the whole world.
Even so, the pain of the confrontation would stay with her for a long time. The fallout from the argument between the sisters rippled through the entire family. It didn't take long for each member to pick a side, like a silent dispute that split the household in two. The next family dinner was living proof of this split. Their mother stood firmly by Marina's side. She repeated that donation was an act of love and that refusing would mean living with guilt forever. Her eyes, once full of tenderness, now cast a cold and painful judgment on Clara. It was as if she had lost her older daughter to the cause of the younger one. Her father, on the other hand, began to defend Clara. While he acknowledged the seriousness of Roberto's situation, he said their daughter couldn't be forced into something that terrified her. His quiet support was the only relief Clara found in the middle of the storm. Other relatives took sides too. Some sent secret messages of support, saying they understood her fear. Others, however, didn't hold back their criticism, calling her selfish. Clara could tell that with every phone call or visit, there was always an implicit demand. Their parents' house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a courtroom. Every gathering turned into a stage for veiled accusations, and Clara felt judged for everything, even the way she held a glass of water. Marina, for her part, intensified her emotional campaign. She brought Roberto on family visits, highlighting his fragility, as if his presence were a living reminder of the urgency. For Clara, every encounter was torture. Her father-in-law, silent, rarely spoke. His tired and grateful eyes only increased the pressure on Clara, who didn't know if she felt pity or anger. His lack of words created a void that everyone else filled with their expectations. In the solitude of her apartment, Clara tried to hold on to her father's support, but even he, at times, let slip a sad look that made her doubt her own decision. The weight of the family division was tearing her apart. The war was no longer just between two sisters. It had become a battle that cut across generations, alliances, and affections. And in the middle of the battlefield, Clara felt more and more alone. Clara began to avoid her family more and more intensely. Phone calls went unanswered, and Marina's messages were ignored.
In her silent apartment, she took refuge in books and soft music, trying to muffle the weight on her shoulders. But the more she hid, the more unbearable the loneliness became. At night, Clara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling her heart race. With every beat, she imagined the surgery, the scalpel, the anesthesia, the recovery. The thought alone made her body tremble. It wasn't just a fear of the hospital. It was a fear of losing herself.
Childhood memories came back with force. She remembered all the times when, as a little girl, Marina would take control of situations while she stayed quiet to avoid conflict. Now, as an adult, she realized she was still repeating the same pattern, silencing herself in the face of outside pressure. Her father called one night and tried to cheer her up, suggesting she visit him to talk. But Clara refused, afraid of more demands. Her choked-up voice betrayed the pain she was trying to hide. He didn't push. He just said, "You're not alone, sweetheart. Your life matters too." Those words echoed deeply. Even so, Clara felt weak. She spent hours researching donor stories, trying to find courage. But the accounts of complications and long-term effects only reinforced her fears. With every article she read, the dilemma seemed more cruel. At school, Clara smiled for her students, but inside, she was falling apart. She lived like an actress playing a role of normality while her mind was imploding in silence. No one there could imagine the weight of the decision she was carrying. Marina, on the other hand, showed no mercy. She sent messages with photos of the children saying they need their grandfather. For Clara, each picture was like an arrow to the heart. The guilt consumed her, but the fear was even greater. On a cold night, Clara broke down in tears, kneeling on the living room floor. She felt lost between being the family's heroine or its traitor. The silence of the night was broken only by the sobs echoing off the walls. And there, alone, Clara realized she was no longer just fighting external pressure, but her own identity. Would she be able to free herself from this cycle of guilt and fear? The day of the decision arrived before Clara even realized it. Marina called her to a meeting at their parents' house, saying they needed to settle things once and for all. Exhausted from running, Clara agreed. Her heart raced as she walked through the door of the house where she grew up. The living room was full. Marina, their parents, Marina's husband, and even Roberta were present. The atmosphere was one of final judgment. Clara felt her legs tremble, but she took a deep breath. She knew she couldn't postpone it any longer. Marina was the first to speak. She repeated everything she had already said, now with even more emotion. She talked about her father-in-law's life, the family's suffering, the young children who needed their grandfather. Tears streamed down her face, and each word felt like a knife stabbing Clara's heart. Her mother reinforced it, saying donating would be an act of eternal love, something that would bring the sisters even closer. Her father remained silent, but his steady gaze on Clara showed how much this was destroying her. When it was her turn, Clara took a deep breath. Her hands were trembling, but her voice came out steady. She said she had thought about it, cried over it, and tortured herself for weeks, but that she couldn't donate. She explained that her fear was greater than any pressure, and that her own life had value too. The silence that followed was deafening. Marina stared at her as if she had just heard a betrayal. Their mother brought her hands to her face in despair. Roberto remained quiet, his eyes downcast, saying nothing. Clara tried to add that it wasn't a lack of love, but a need to respect her own limits. The words, however, found no welcome. It seemed like no one wanted to hear them.
The tension exploded when Marina screamed that Clara had condemned her father-in-law. She called her selfish, cold, and heartless. The accusations echoed through the room like hammer blows, and Clara felt shattered. Even so, she didn't back down. The decision was made, and despite the pain, there was also a thread of relief. For the first time, she had chosen for herself, without being crushed by the pressure. As she left the house, Clara felt the cold wind hit her face. Tears streamed down, but her heart, for the first time in weeks, felt a little lighter. Marina's words echoed in Clara's mind like incessant thunder. "You've destroyed our family." The scene from the meeting came back in painful flashes. Her mother's accusing eyes, Roberto's heavy silence, and her sister's rage. Nothing she could say would change how she had been seen that night. Back in her apartment, Clara curled up on the sofa, hugging a pillow as if it were her only company. She cried until she had no strength left. She felt like an outcast, rejected by those she loved most. For the first time, she believed she might have lost her sister forever. The following days were even worse. Marina wouldn't answer her calls and blocked her on social media. Her mother avoided speaking to her, responding only curtly when necessary. Her father was the only one who still tried to offer support, but even his words sounded powerless in the face of the storm. At school, Clara taught mechanically. Her students noticed her distant gaze and her voice quieter than usual, but no one could imagine the pain she carried in silence. The teacher who had always radiated serenity now seemed like a shadow of her former self. One night, looking out the window, Clara thought about what would have happened if she had said yes. Would Marina see her as a hero? Would she have finally earned her family's respect? The questions tormented her, but the answer came quickly. What if she didn't survive? What if she lost her health and could never be independent again?
The dilemma consumed her. Clara felt trapped in a cycle of guilt and fear with no way out. For a moment, she wished she could disappear, vanish from it all, as if her absence were the only way to relieve the suffering. But deep down, she knew running away wouldn't erase the pain. Her relationship with her sister was in tatters, and the family's future seemed forever tarnished. Clara had made her choice, but the price was a deafening silence that surrounded her on all sides. Alone in the darkness of her room, holding herself, Clara lived through her darkest moment. It was as if she had lost not only her sister, but an essential part of her own identity. Yet, amid the tears, a nearly invisible flame remained lit, the hope that one day she might be understood. While Clara was sinking into her cane, Marina's family was preparing for one last attempt. The other donor, the distant cousin, had finally been accepted, despite the lower compatibility. The surgery would be risky, but it was the only viable option after Clara's refusal. At the hospital, the mood was tense. Marina stayed close to her father-in-law, holding his hand tightly, as if her strength could transfer to him. Her husband tried to be the family's pillar, but his tired expression betrayed his fear. The children were left with neighbors, unaware of the drama unfolding. Clara found out about the surgery from her father. Upon hearing the news, she felt her heart race. Part of her wanted to run to the hospital, but shame and the fear of rejection held her back. She knew her presence might be unwanted at that moment. The hours dragged on like an eternity. Marina sent messages to the family group chat, updating them on every stage of the procedure. Clara read them in silence, alone in her apartment, her hands trembling. It was like watching a fire from afar that she couldn't put out.
Finally, the news came. The surgery was over. Roberto had survived, though the doctors warned of possible complications. The family erupted in relief and gratitude. Clara, however, cried alone, a mix of relief and bitterness washing over her. Marina, still at the hospital, made an emotional post thanking everyone who had supported the family. She never once mentioned her sister's name. For Clara, that silence was more painful than any insult. Even from a distance, Clara felt connected to that outcome. She knew that, in some way, she would always be remembered as the sister who said no. It didn't matter that Roberto had gotten another chance. The mark of her refusal was already etched into the family's history.
Your father called to reassure you, saying the worst was over. But after hanging up, Clara just stared into the emptiness of her living room. The feeling was that the surgery had saved a life, but had forever sealed the distance between two sisters. Deep down, a question echoed in her mind. Had she made the right choice? A few weeks after the surgery, life began to return to its usual rhythm. Roberto, still recovering, was showing signs of improvement. A sense of relief hung over the family, even though the atmosphere between Clara and Marina remained heavy. It was as if an invisible wall had gone up between them. Clara avoided family gatherings, but she knew she couldn't hide forever. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. Marina knocked on her door. She looked tired, her eyes marked by exhaustion, but there was also a different kind of serenity in her expression. The initial silence was tense. Neither knew where to begin. Finally, Marina sighed and said she didn't want to fight anymore. She admitted that she had pressured Clara too much, that she had let desperation speak louder than reason. Her words didn't erase the wounds, but they opened up space for something new. Clara listened in silence, her heart racing. For the first time, her sister was admitting her own excesses. Still, the pain of the manipulation and accusations didn't disappear easily. But inside, Clara also felt a deep desire not to carry hatred. With a trembling voice, Clara explained her fears. She talked about feeling unheard, about being treated only as a solution and not as a person with limits. Marina cried as she realized the full impact of what she had done. For the first time, she looked at her sister without demands, only with empathy. The hug that followed wasn't a full reconciliation, but of mutual recognition. There were still cracks, but now there was a possibility of rebuilding. It was a start, and that was enough. The following days felt lighter. Clara started visiting her parents again, and although there were still uncomfortable glances, she felt more steady. She now knew she didn't have to carry the burden alone. Her no wasn't selfishness. It was an act of courage and self-respect. Marina, in turn, began to see Clara differently. Not as the fragile, cowardly sister she had always imagined, but as someone with the strength to defend her own boundaries. Their relationship would still take time to heal, but there was hope. In the quiet of her home, Clara reflected on everything. She realized that family love isn't measured only by sacrifices, but also by the ability to respect each other's choices. She finally understood that to love is not to erase yourself, but to be true to oneself. The future still held uncertainties, but Clara felt stronger. The ordeal had left its marks, but it had also taught her a valuable lesson. The bonds of blood and affection only survive when they respect the boundaries of each heart. And for the first time in a long time, Clara believed there was still room to start over. And what about you? Would you have the courage to say no like Clara, or would you give in to family pressure? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any of the upcoming intense stories that will touch your heart. Because here, every story is a mirror of real life.